Okay. Welcome to the Young Turks. Anna Kasparian and John Iadarola with you. We have a ton of news to get to, so I'm going to get started with our first topic, which is a little bit of a dissection of a conversation that happened on The View today. So, the worldwide coronavirus pandemic has threatened the lives of millions of Americans. At this point, thousands of Americans have already lost their lives, and we have a very vulnerable healthcare system where 27 million Americans do not have access to healthcare. More than 3 million people have filed for unemployment. They've been laid off. They've lost their jobs. And so there's a big question about what we need to do about fixing our healthcare system. And the ladies of The View thought it would be a good idea to have Bernie Sanders on, which I agree with. Great guest. Here is how they decided to bring that segment in. Take a look.
How does presidential candidate Senator Bernie Sanders answer accusations that he's politicizing the pandemic to push his Medicare for All agenda and that staying in the race could guarantee Trump another term? He's live on The View. Next.
Someone pays her to sound like that. Next.
No, I think it's permanent. It's just baked in now.
What was that? What was that?
Disdain. Like it was a jar overflowing with disdain is what it was.
Every argument against single payer has been completely and utterly demolished by what this country is going through right now. The nonsense propaganda about how people love their employer provided insurance. Oh, really? Do all those laid off people right now enjoy the fact that they're not insured? Do they enjoy that they probably got a letter in the mail telling them that they can pay an exorbitant amount for Cobra? This is absurd. This is the most absurd way of teasing the audience about an upcoming interview on the show.
I think that everyone in the audience should recognize what's going on right now. Anna Kasparian is politicizing coronavirus to push your Medicare for All agenda. I mean,
so they're saying you're not allowed to talk about fixing a broken system, which we are currently suffering the consequences of right now. Right now. You're not allowed to discuss any solutions for it because that would be politicizing it.
I mean, if you wanted to talk about the link between these two things, which, first of all, Bernie definitely wants to talk about that link, and it's perfectly reasonable. If you're going to bring him on, you're going to talk to him about coronavirus, and he believes that the policies he's been advocating for would have put us in a far better position to deal with it, would have saved lives. How about just say Bernie Sanders believes that single-payer healthcare would have helped America weather the pandemic? We'll discuss next on The View. Like, that would be a perfectly reasonable thing. But to pitch it as, how does he respond to accusations? And is he just trying to get Trump elected? To do it on both of those things implies that the only reason they're bringing him on is to try to take him down. It apparently was the only reason that they were bringing him on. And it does a disservice to the many people, even in their audience, who are probably growing increasingly interested in Medicare for All as they see what our current healthcare system is doing in a time of emergency.
So I think it's important to juxtapose what you guys just saw with the way the very fine producers over at The View treat other individuals. Okay, so let's take a look at the next video.
Future shock.
I want every American to be prepared for the hard days that lie ahead.
The president gives his most candid take on the possible death toll from the coronavirus.
They're very sobering. You know, when you see 100,000 people, that's at a minimum number.
Is hearing the worst case scenario the wake-up call America needs right now? Plus, presidential candidate Senator Bernie Sanders is live on The View. Why he's not dropping out of the race and says the pandemic proves American healthcare is broken and he's the man to fix it.
So it's interesting. That last part with Bernie was fine. And actually the way that they handled the Trump portion of that was fine as well, because they're not sharing like this overwhelming bias. They're not giving Trump a ton of credit. They're not, sharing any type of commentary in it. They're just explaining, hey, this is something that happened and we're going to discuss it when we come back from the break. That's the way to do it. I'm not saying that you need to say something incredibly favorable about Bernie Sanders, but accusing him of politicizing healthcare at a time when Americans are literally dying because of this pandemic is ridiculous. And then adding that extra layer of, is he just trying to get Trump reelected?
Yeah. Yeah, and also, I mean, I think that our audience is savvy enough that they probably, like me, just cringe at politicizing being applied to something that is obviously political. And it's the main piece of news, political or otherwise, in America around the globe right now. Who is talking about it? Who is planning for the future of it that is not politicizing it? What does that even mean? Like, he's saying we need to institute Medicare for all. That'll help us get out of this. It'll help us in the next pandemic. If they had Joe Biden on, he'd say, no, we should just continue with the system that we have right now. 10 million people still won't be insured, even if I get elected after a few years. How is that not politicizing it to say that we should maintain the status quo rather than changing? They're all doing the same thing. They're all advocating for what they think the system should be. But Bernie Sanders is the one that's having the label of politicizing being applied to him.
So maybe some would argue, hey, that was a tease, obviously written by producers. The hosts have nothing to do with that, so let's not be too tough on the hosts. Well, the interview didn't really convince me otherwise, because the framing of the questions were telling, to say the least. You guys should all watch the full segment to get a sense of how all of the hosts handled this interview. I think Whoopi Goldberg's ridiculous pressure on Bernie to drop out is something that I wish we had enough time to talk about. But since we're on the topic of healthcare, let's go to the framing that we heard from Sunny Hostin, who has made no secret about the fact that she does not like Bernie Sanders. So just understand where this framing is coming from.
Senator, some are accusing you of using the pandemic to push Medicare for all. And they're saying, at this time, we should put politics aside and come together behind the president. What is your response to politicizing this allegation that everyone is politicizing?
Well, I don't know who is making the allegation. I have political opponents who make all kinds of accusations. But should we put politics aside and all come together? Of course we should. And when we all come together, it seems to me we have to do several things. One of them is guarantee health care to all people right now. The absurdity that you may be diagnosed with the coronavirus and you go into the hospital and you spend thousands of dollars getting treated and maybe, God willing, you come out alive, well, you got a huge bill out there. If you're being diagnosed with cancer right now, the truth is that we have 500,000 people a year who go bankrupt because of medically related bills. So let us come together. You're absolutely right. But in coming together, we got to do a couple of things. And one thing is say that especially in this crisis, people should not have to worry about the cost of health care.
I think he answered that perfectly fine. But that was the whole, tease right before they went to the segment about how he's just politicizing an issue that he's tied to. But it's such a relevant issue that would actually save people's lives. Imagine all those people who did get laid off, right? So you're worried about your livelihood, clearly, but there's that added layer of being worried about getting sick and not having the ability to pay for the treatment you need to combat coronavirus. Because while testing is free based on what Congress has done, treatment is not free. Yeah. So if you don't have insurance, like the 17-year-old in Lancaster County, California, who was turned away when he went to urgent care, you are likely to die, right? That's what happened to that 17-year-old. He was turned away, he went into cardiac arrest, and he died.
Yeah, and so you're right to point out that even Trump has tried to conflate no co-payments for anything, and no, it's only for the testing, it's not for the treatment. But I want to sit down with these politicians and ask them, do you think that just because coronavirus is a big threat that people aren't getting sick from other things? Like, I don't think people's cancer suddenly went into remission just because we have this pandemic. People who are suffering from chronic problems involving respiratory issues, their heart, all sorts of things like diabetes, all sorts of conditions like that. Those are still an issue. Those can still leave you broke and on the street, especially in a time when every week millions of Americans are losing their jobs. Maybe Sunny Hostin, maybe she was saying a question that she herself does not believe. If so, I would make that clear when I ask questions that other people are saying and that I don't believe. I always make that very clear. But the way that she described that we should put politics aside and just get behind the president, that's how somebody who's literally never thought about politics before would talk. Like, do you believe that Donald Trump is doing that? Is he putting politics aside? Is Mitch McConnell putting politics aside? And what if we had done that? What if we had done what Sunny Hostin is implying some people want a month ago, and we'd never put any pressure on Donald Trump? Where do we think he would be today? Would testing kits be sent all around the country? Would some states have begrudgingly finally gotten some ventilators from him? Would he have just gone ahead with his plan to reopen the economy on Easter? The idea that what he's making are just leadership decisions. Everyone else is doing politics. That's how babies think about politics. That's not how serious people who get paid large amounts of money to analyze politics and news should be thinking about or talking about it. Whether they themselves believe these things or not, they should be clear to their audience what's actually going on.
Well, Sunny Hostin is very much aware of what's happening in politics. She does pay attention. I actually think Sunny Hostin is a pretty intelligent person. I agree with her on some things. I completely disagree with her complete and utter disdain for Bernie Sanders and the policies that would really improve the lives of so many Americans who are struggling, not just now, but who had been struggling under a broken system. We have not been prepared at all to deal with this pandemic. And a huge reason why is because of this for-profit commoditized model of healthcare that continues to treat people who can't afford private health insurance as second-class citizens who are worthy of death. And to point to a politician who wants to change that and argue that he's just, using this to his advantage to further his agenda, first of all, he should. Okay, because his agenda matters. What he wants to do matters. And secondly, if you can't discuss solutions for a broken system now, when can you? And Bernie Sanders sure as hell should not let them intimidate him from stopping this incredibly important messaging about healthcare, because that's what they want. Okay, they want to beat him to submission. He is insanely friendly to bad faith actors, and that drives me crazy personally. But no, if we can't make the case for Medicare for all now, then there's never a time when we can make a case for Medicare for all. And I want to go to the second video featuring Sunny Hostin, because I would argue that the framing of her question here is actually much worse.
Senator Sanders, this is Sunny. You say that the coronavirus crisis proves that our for-profit healthcare system is a failure. Can you explain why your Medicare for All plan would work better in this kind of scenario?
Well, right now, there is, for two reasons. Number one, there is growing anxiety in this country that people are increasingly unable to afford health care, or that they may not have any health care at all. Right now, before the epidemic, we were looking at 87 million people who are uninsured or underinsured. And now, when millions of people are losing their jobs, they're losing their health care. What do? We have the absurd situation that the recent stimulus bill covered you for the cost of the testing that you may need for the coronavirus. It did not cover the treatment. So you've lost your job, you may not have any income, and now you're worried about health care. What Medicare for All does is not a radical idea. It does what every other major country on earth does. It guarantees health care to all of our people not tied to employment. You lose your job, you got coverage.
Again, I think he handled that right. And the reason why I disagree with her framing there is because she uses the same tactic or trick that we see in journalism all the time, which is some people say, right? And I just think that I think Sunny Hostin is better than this, right? Because think about it. She knows how many people have lost their jobs. She knows how desperately people need those stimulus checks, which is nothing. It's a tiny Band-Aid on a gushing wound. And she still thinks that it's a valid question to ask, hey, why do you think that your single payer system would be better than this for-profit model.
Yeah.
Really?
Exactly.
You're smarter than that.
Well, yeah, and so have you read the Write-Ups by Doctors analysis of how, in general, countries that have systems like this are weathering this better? Have you, like, I can make the case, certainly, Bernie Sanders, I mean, I can make the case, but if you're that interested in it, you could read about it, and then maybe you could bring that up or bring some of those academics or doctors onto the show to make the case as well. You know, if you want to put politics aside, which is a great thing to do in the middle of a primary election, I think. Maybe we put it aside for like 6 months. We just rally behind the president until he gets his second term. Obviously absurd. If I was Bernie Sanders too, I would, again, I don't know exactly what Sunny Hostin or any of the other hosts on The View think about what should be done in terms of coronavirus. But I would say, look, a lot of Americans think that it's incredibly immoral that just because someone gets infected with coronavirus, that if they can't afford to get tested, they shouldn't be tested, or that if they indeed have it, that just because they can't afford to be treated, they shouldn't be treated. Should we let people die on the streets of coronavirus? And I assume that they would say, no, that's incredibly immoral. And I would say, okay, well, then why should we let that happen with the regular flu or with diabetes or with thyroid cancer? Why would we let this happen with literally anything? We are being like people who have not thought about this, about radically remaking the way healthcare is provided in America. They're being wakened up to how obviously immoral it is to let people die through no fault of their own. Now let's just widen things just a little bit and realize that it is just as evil to let people die because of lack of resources from literally any other health problem.
Yeah, and some people might argue, hey, it's The View, don't get too frustrated with it. It's just a daytime show. But all of this propaganda, unfortunately, does have some influence. And it seeps into social media. It seeps into conversations that average Americans are having. I'll give you an example because you mentioned morality, John. And I believe that it's immoral to allow people to die if they don't have the means to pay for private insurance. Today, Alyssa Milano tweeted, "It is intellectually bankrupt for Bernie to pretend that not unifying the party today is advantageous to a Democratic victory in November. He's still taking donations from people during crisis on a campaign that has no path forward." Mind you, I mean, we haven't finished the primaries yet. So to say that there's no path forward, is it going to be difficult? Yes. But, was there any pressure for Warren to drop out early, right? She dropped out when she was comfortable doing it. And anyone who tried to pressure her to drop out was completely criticized, lambasted. And with Bernie, it's okay, you need to drop out. And then she says it's intellectually and morally bankrupt. I think it's intellectually and morally bankrupt to support a candidate who has credible sexual assault allegations against him, sexual assault allegations which the media refuses to acknowledge, even though they jump on any and all sexual assault allegations when it has to do with individuals they dislike, okay? I think that it's morally bankrupt to be supportive of a candidate who was just asked on MSNBC whether he thinks a single-payer healthcare system would have been better for this country in the middle of this pandemic. And he said, no, I don't think it would have fixed anything. And, that's what he had to say, considering all those people who had an employer provided health insurance plan are now left to either pay for COBRA, which no one can pay for, or just not have any health insurance at a time when we don't have anything protecting us from the cost of treatment for COVID-19. I think that's morally bankrupt.
I agree.
All right, we got to take a break. We'll be back.
We're very honest that we're progressives. We call the Young Turks home of progressives, and we support progressive candidates.
There has been this reemergence of political activism, especially among young people.
This weekend was the second Women's March, both across the U.S. and across the world. So these people are not simply marching, they're not simply talking, they're also running for office. And when they do run, they're going to make a difference.
Joe Crowley is congressman from New York. He's very powerful. Why? He raised a lot of money. But there's someone finally challenging him.
We need to have representation that advocates as fiercely for working class people as possible from this seat.
If candidates like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez even get a little bit of media attention outside of what the Young Turks does, they have an excellent chance of winning.
She's going to win. She's going to win.
68% reporting.
The majority of Americans want Medicare for all. So I don't care what you and your corporate cronies want. What I care about is what the American people want.
We believe in total change. Everything runs on donor money.
and that is what we will fight, and that is exactly why they don't like us.
We're having fun. It's election night.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has defeated Joe Crowley.
Here we go again.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Down goes Crowley. Down goes Crowley. Down goes Manafort. Down goes Cohen.
Populist left wing with a gigantic victory in Mexico.
Senator Gillibrand, you have made a pledge to no longer accept corporate PAC money.
Women came out in record numbers in the primaries.
They said you'll be lucky to get one candidate. We now have 12 that have won their primaries.
Bezos and Amazon announcing that they are going to go to a 15-hour minimum wage.
We're making progress. Let's keep going.
Many of these women made history.
The biggest victories, all women of color. Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, Sharice Davids and Deb Haaland. For a long time, we have not had progressives in power. It's going to be something to behold.
Welcome to Happy Hour, everybody. After a week of soul-crushing news, we break out the good stuff. Good news, good videos, good people, and, of course, drink good alcohol. That's the worst thing I've ever had.
This is the best show.
Full disclosure, we did do a shot right before the show began. It says,
Let's
flamingo.
Flamingo.
The reason you had trouble with that word is it's not a word.
Okay.
This is the one of everything.
I've got a rash. Could I just put it on that to see if it'll take it off?
What did you used to think this was?
Bull piss.
Drink it, swallow it, spit it. Oh, that's needed after a day like this. Cheers to Brett Ehrlich. Climax. Uranus smells like farts. Because of course it does. This is the worst sketch ever of a perp. But guess what, ladies and gentlemen? They found the guy. This is Sophie's super happy dog story of the week.
This dog is so precious and deserves the world. I'm just not drinking that beer.
Here's my dog. This is Onyx.
Yeah, I would just say that he's exotic because he's not your traditional dog. Still 12 out of 10 because they're all good.
Well, if that made you happy, just wait till you see the best thing ever of the week. There is a woman who moves like a horse.
Why do I want to go home and like try this?
We're actually going to show you the running butthole challenge right now. What's happening?
No, that's just wrong.
Every way. And we'll see you next time.
Hey, Dave. As you can probably see, Skype froze. Frozen crashed.
You know, I'm watching that documentary on the Vietnam War, and there was a TV journalist in the middle of some tiny little village in Vietnam doing live TV as the soldiers were burning the Vietnamese huts, and it didn't crash. And that was 1965, and he was in Vietnam.
Hey guys, welcome back to TYT. Anna Kasparian and John Idarola with you. As some of you might already know, TYT is doing a fundraiser to help keep us sustainable. This was actually a fundraiser we started before the coronavirus pandemic became so serious that people were quarantined. And so we totally understand the financial pressures and stress that people are under. And so we want to make sure that you guys take care of yourselves first, take care of your families. However, if you are able to help support this show, especially during this difficult time, it would be greatly appreciated because, you know, clearly based on the types of topics we discuss, we are definitely reliant on our audience in order to keep us afloat. So we started this goal of raising $2 million by the end of the year, and we have already raised $237,000 because you guys are incredible. And so there's just a lot of generosity out there that I'm so grateful for. Thank you for keeping us alive. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I was very surprised. As I've mentioned a couple times on the damage report, like if we're doing our job and talking about the most important news right now, that means it is very difficult to actually receive any sort of ad revenue, which is obviously a big part of what keeps our company in existence. And I mean, we can switch to talking about stuff that is ad friendly, that has nothing to do with what's actually ravaging our country. But we feel like we should stick to the news. And thankfully, we have members and people who are going to support us while we do that.
Definitely. So if you're interested in contributing, you can go to tyt.com/go, tyt.com/go. It's incredible. And for the month of April, so the goal is to raise $200,000 each month. And for the month of April, we're already up to $37,861. Again, you guys are just amazing. And I don't know, I get really emotional talking about it because, you know, there's just like so much cruelty in the world right now. And you watch those press briefings that Trump does and you see how he exploits it for his own political agenda and his own reelection campaign. And you're just like, wow, people just don't care about people. But the audience always reminds me that there are a lot of good people out there. So thank you. Okay, with that said, I wanted to update you guys on some really important polling that Morning Consult did on Medicare for All. So let's get right to it. Right now, there are so many Americans who are beyond worried about their future, both financially and when it comes to their health. And that's because a lot of people just got laid off and will be losing their employer-provided health insurance. And so, unsurprisingly, we're seeing a significant increase of voters who feel that Medicare for All is the right solution to this problem. And those results are definitely shown in this recent Morning Consult poll. They found that 55% of voters support Medicare for All, and that's the highest level since June of 2019, when 54% backed the plan. From February to March, net support for single-payer healthcare jumped from 11 points to 20 points. And where is this support coming from? Well, it's coming from the very voters the Democratic Party needs to attract in order to win the election: independent voters. Independents helped fuel Medicare for All's rise in March with an 8-point uptick in net support. And by the way, for those of you who think, nah, I don't like change, I want to keep the system the way it is, 27 million Americans uninsured before the pandemic, now millions more uninsured because they've been laid off. That sounds fine and dandy to me, except this is a devastating burden on our healthcare system, the coronavirus is. And based on a recent study that was done by California Covered, they found that health insurance premiums could increase as much as 40% next year due to this pandemic. Something to keep in mind. And, you know, I mean, Donald Trump, obviously, if he does anything in regards to healthcare going forward, it will be to, again, attempt to repeal the ACA and put us back to, 2007 or whatever. And Joe Biden is saying, like, maybe we strengthen it a little bit, but no, it's still millions and millions of people won't have health insurance. And so, yeah, I'm not surprised that in a time where people are thinking about their health care, and what the future of their insurance is going to be like, even for those who haven't lost their jobs, they might be thinking, well, okay, my company is keeping me employed, but will that last for 2 weeks? Will it last for 2 months? It certainly isn't going to last if this is 18 months. So they're worried about the future too. And so they're changing, which is probably a result of, I don't know, using the Views logic, the coronavirus has politicized itself to push for its Medicare for All agenda. But no, like, for whatever reason, I'm glad to see it. This is the most salient issue. It already was, but it's far more salient. All the more reason that we need to have a vigorous debate inside of the Democratic primary between people with very different ideas of what the future of American healthcare should be. Exactly. So right now, the ball is in the Democratic establishment's court. They have more and more evidence indicating that the very voters that they need to attract in order to win re-election and defeat Donald Trump want Medicare for All. So the question is, are they going to help Donald Trump win his re-election by ignoring the desires of American voters? That's my question to the Democratic establishment. I would like Nancy Pelosi to answer that question. I would like to hear what the answer is from the fine ladies at The View with their incredibly intellectual political commentary and analysis. I want to know, is the Democratic Party going to do what it takes to defeat Donald Trump? Are they going to listen to the voters, or are they going to listen to their corporate donors?
Yeah. Yeah, and look, right now I know you just published your most recent op-ed in the Hill, which is absolutely awesome. Everyone should go take a look at it. I'm working on one too, which is basically does Joe Biden even want to be president? And the reason I'm asking that is because like the issue that is dominating the news now, and that is almost certainly going to be dominating the vast majority of people's thinking about whether they should stick with Trump or whether they should change it up, is going to be the coronavirus and hypothetically whatever we do to recover from it. And he's saying he doesn't want to get into a political fight with Trump about it. So he's effectively yielding all that ground. And as more and more of the population, including the independents that they say they want so badly, are interested in policies that he's not interested in, and in fact has said that he would veto if they made it to his desk, I don't know what else he can do to signal that as the political context changes, he was always going to have a rough time. But now it's looking like he's going to effectively do nothing to adapt to the way that things are changing. And if you are a Biden supporter, or if you just hate Trump and want to see him replaced, this should be terrifying you on a daily basis, how much ground he's ceded to Donald Trump already.
100%. Well, let's move on to some of the other naysayers when it comes to Medicare for all. And this is an important story. Now is the time to push for something that the majority of Americans want. So we're going to stay on it. So yesterday, I was shocked to learn that some members of the Democratic establishment and even Kamala Harris supporters do not believe that Kamala Harris's mother, who tragically died from cancer, deserved to receive treatment and care free at the point of service. I was shocked to see that because I would think that they would have enough empathy to understand the importance of providing free health care to someone who is suffering from something as devastating as cancer. So how did I find out about this? Well, it all started with a tweet from Kamala Harris herself. She tweeted the following, and I agree with her on this. Testing for coronavirus and treatment needs to be free, period. Now, that's a perfectly fine point to bring up. It absolutely should be free, especially considering how many Americans were uninsured prior to the pandemic and how many more millions and millions of Americans will now be uninsured because they've been laid off as a result of the pandemic. So Brianna Joy Gray, who is the National Press Secretary for Bernie Sanders, quote tweeted her and said the following: "This is a good start. But is it okay to die from cancer or diabetes because you're poor?" So she's asking a very legitimate question about how every life is precious, every life matters, and we shouldn't just cherry pick when the treatment is free. We should make this available to all Americans regardless of their income. But members of the Democratic establishment apparently don't think that it's a good idea for someone suffering from cancer to get free service at the point of care. And I'll give you some examples. There was Brian Michael Scully. He's a screenwriter in Los Angeles who is supportive of Elizabeth Warren. He tweeted the following: "What the legitimate F is wrong with you?" That's what he had tweeted.
This is at Brianna Joy Gray.
Yes, this is at Brianna Joy Gray. I mean, there was an insane amount of hate directed toward her. So then you have Kim, who's a producer at Intertheory. She tweeted, "Please, I beg of you to reconsider your priorities. Destroying the Democratic Party ain't it, said with love." What?
I think the priority is not having people die because they're poor. That seems like a pretty good priority. I thought we all shared that, actually.
I mean, it got so incredibly vicious. Zerlina Maxwell, who worked on Hillary Clinton's campaign and is now, a pundit on MSNBC, said, "The tone of this tweet is mean and disrespectful, especially considering Kamala's mother died from cancer." I think it's mean and disrespectful to make an argument that, allowing people to get the treatment that they need to stay alive without worrying about the cost is out of the question and should be criticized. The things that they were throwing at her, if you want to look for yourselves, I just like a dark hole of negativity, threats about her job prospects after, the primaries. It was gross to say the least.
Yeah, part of it is that they disagree with her on this, and part of it is she's a representative for Bernie Sanders, and so she thinks, well, I'm not actually that offended, but if I can act like I am, if I can take her down, then that'll hurt Bernie Sanders too. Maybe I can get him to disavow her. Maybe I can get him to fire her. Wouldn't that be amazing? And like the bringing up that Kamala's mother died of cancer, is that supposed to like, so now you're disqualified from bringing it up? Okay, well then by that theory, my dad died of cancer. I give Brianna a credit now or ability to talk about it. Okay, we've canceled out the 2 parent deaths due to cancer. I mean, I remember my dad for the couple of years as he was suffering and dying from thyroid cancer, continually plagued with medical bills that he had to deal with. It would have been amazing if the last couple of years of his life had been freed from that additional source of stress that he desperately did not need. So we've now canceled that out. Brianna, go ahead and advocate for people who are struggling with paying for their medical bills again. The whole thing is absolutely absurd. I want no one to get coronavirus. I want no one to die from coronavirus. Coronavirus is a massive threat. But there's no moral reason, there is no ethical reason why you should make the testing and the treatment free and then be viciously opposed to the idea that someone who has, sarcoidosis should also get free testing or for treatment, or no, we're not just going to help you if you get something that's trendy and impending. We want to protect you. We have the resources to protect you. We know from recent weeks, we have unlimited money to spend on what we actually prioritize. Maybe we could start prioritizing people's lives, and especially those who up until now have had far less resources than some of the people attacking Brianna.
What I don't understand is, do the people who go after supporters of Medicare for All as viciously as they do, stop and really think about what they're fighting against, right? Because while they're pretending to be outraged at Brianna Joy Gray, what they need to really reflect on, because this is now out in the public, they have put this out in the public, they are loudly declaring to the rest of the world, if you support a healthcare system that provides care to every single person, regardless of their income, we are against you. We don't think that lives are valuable, and we will fight you. We will intimidate you. So I'll give you an example of what kind of intimidation Brianna Joy Gray is dealing with as well. By the way, these are from the very people who go off in a corner and cry somewhere because they think that they've been bullied by Bernie Sanders supporters on Twitter. Okay. In the meantime, though, they're threatening Brianna Joy Gray's livelihood. So one of those tweets was from Michael, let's take a look at this. He tweeted the following: "We've both been in politics long enough to know that this person is putting herself in a very bad position for future opportunities. I hope she knows exactly what she's doing, because making unnecessary enemies is a fool's errand." And then Bakari Sellers responded with the following: "We remember."
Oh my God.
No, that's what they're willing to threaten people with if the individuals they're threatening are supportive of a single payer healthcare system. That's out there. That's out in the open.
It's ridiculous. Yeah, she might not get brought into MSNBC or something. I think she's aware of that. I think that she is doing what she thinks she needs to do to move the country to where it needs to be. There are a lot of people that you can come at and say, are you actually following your values and advocating for the policies that you're advocating for? I know that you think you are, but are you actually doing that? I think that she should probably get a pass in this one. I think that she knows what she's doing.
No, she should be applauded. She didn't, but by the way, she said cancer and diabetes. She wasn't trying to make a point about Kamala Harris's mom. And had she tried to make the point about Kamala Harris's mom, she's literally arguing that Kamala Harris's mom shouldn't have to worry about exorbitant medical fees as she's suffering from cancer. What is wrong with these people? This is what we're up against, guys. This is what we're up against. So this nonsense about capitulating with establishment Democrats who are so far up their own corrupt asses that they don't care about your lives. It's a ridiculous notion. This idea that if we're just friendlier to them, if we're just nicer to them, that they're going to work with us and actually pass the policies that people desperately need in this country to live. It's the most absurd idea ever. And right now is the time for progressives to fight. Right now, not tomorrow, not when the pandemic is over, not when countless Americans die already because the system has failed them. Now is the time, okay? Nancy Pelosi, not your friend. Bakari Seller, not your friend. Mainstream media, not your friend. Know your enemies and fight. If you're not willing to do it, then shut up and stop pretending like you actually give a damn about these policies. We'll be right back.
I'm old enough that I remember when Captain Crunch put the berries in there.
Yay, crunch berries!
And I was like, ooh, the fake berries.
Remember?
We're gonna try that.
We did a story back in the day about how a woman sued, I don't know, General Mills.
She'd been eating it for 4 years, believing that it was actual berries.
Yeah. She's like, these aren't real berries at all. I'm like, I got news for you. Captain Crunch isn't really a captain or a person. Joining me now, legendary whistleblower and American hero, Edward Snowden. First question is, hey, where are you?
I'm in my apartment in Moscow.
All of a sudden, in the studio, Jim Gaffigan, everybody.
Mental illness is, completely undiagnosed in our society.
It's not about a particular administration. It's about a broken system of power, and through that, really, the instrumentalization of a system of not justice, but injustice.
People understand whether they claim to deny climate change or not. Our collective house is in crisis. We're also dealing with the legacy of 40 years of economic policies that have made people's lives more precarious.
Sometimes you got to force people into their humanity. Sometimes you have to shake people into empathy.
Senator Elizabeth Warren joins us in the studio.
Healthcare is a basic human right, and we are fighting for basic human rights.
In order to actually achieve that vision of everyone having access to the same resources and getting to determine the outcome of their life, we have a lot of work to do, and it needs to start right now.
Here's something you may not know. When you deposit your money in a big bank, it doesn't just sit, safe and secure, in a vault. Instead, your money could end up building oil pipelines, mining for coal, or drilling in the Arctic. So if you're concerned about the planet, give your money something good to do. Make the move to green with Aspiration's fossil fuel-free account and join the thousands each week who are switching to save their dollars and save the planet at the same time.
Cenk Uygur joins us.
We are progressive and unapologetically so. Very happy to say that millennial and Gen Z generations are massively progressive along with us.
Democrats, they've been so weak for so long. For God's sake, fight for your side.
I would not like to compromise with Republicans. I would like to defeat them. Lynn, do you support Donald Trump?
Yes, I like Donald Trump.
Well, that's why we think you're racist. The 5 black kids in Central Park did not commit the rape. He said, who cares? Keep him in prison anyway. They probably did something. He's a terrible guy. Very fine people on the side chanting, Jews will not replace us. He says we should ban all Muslims. Well, that's bigotry by definition. He said it during the campaign trail over and over again. Called Latinos criminals and rapists. See, you're used to Republicans being strong on television and Democrats cowering. New day in America. Progressives, we actually fight back. We found the perfect person to lead the Army, Allison Hartson.
The establishment media works hand in glove with our corporate legislators, and our corporate legislators work hand in glove with the corporation. And we're going to make it so that it's a decentralized force throughout the country so that we can quickly identify stories, quickly identify troll farms, and go in and neutralize the enemy, and then start building responsible media throughout the country and on every platform available.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to TYT. Anna and John with you. Had a nice little break. Took a little sip of my drink. Not an alcoholic drink, just like a little bit of LaCroix. And I'm feeling good now. I'm feeling okay. I just needed to cool off a little bit. All right. Well, I want to get to as many stories as possible. So let's move on to what Trump's been up to, especially when it comes to healthcare. So as the number of coronavirus-related deaths increases in the United States, and the number of people testing positive also increases along with updated news, unfortunately, we're learning that Donald Trump isn't willing to give Americans even an inch when it comes to healthcare coverage in order to help them treat this virus, combat the virus. And so there's been like a growing number of people who have been urging him to open up a window of time for special healthcare enrollment, so people who aren't insured at least have the ability to spend too much money on our private healthcare system. I mean, it's literally the least he could do. And he's refusing to do that. So before I give you his response to all of this, I do think it's important to highlight how Trump is very well aware of the dire situation we're in, because he talked about it recently. Take a look.
You're going to start seeing some real light at the end of the tunnel, but this is going to be a very painful, very, very painful 2 weeks. When you look and see at night the kind of death that's been caused by this invisible enemy, it's incredible. I was watching last night Governor Murphy of New Jersey say 29 people died today, meaning yesterday, and others talking about numbers far greater. But you get to know a state. I know New Jersey so well, and you hear 29 people.
So he knows that this is a devastating situation where people are dying, and our lack of preparedness, especially when it comes to our broken healthcare system, is a big issue. So why not make it a little tiny incrementally better by at least allowing people who didn't enroll in healthcare during the open enrollment period to just be able to do so during a special enrollment period? And he's saying, no, not interested.
Yeah, I think you called it literally the least he could do. Yeah, it's just about the least. It's to just give people a little bit of a chance to get health insurance. But no, he is an ideological monster. That's what he is. He hates the ACA more than he hates the idea of people dying unnecessarily from coronavirus. There's no other explanation for it. He's still it's still lurking in the background in his mind, in the minds of other Republicans, that they still really wish that they could get rid of Obamacare if they could. I mean, they tried. They gave it the old college try during his first year, and unfortunately for them, they were stopped. But no, they still want to do it. And I know that yesterday he acknowledged the people that are dying and how many are going to die. And, I'm supposed to be super impressed with him like a bunch of people in national media were. I'm not, because those numbers are higher than they need to be, because he's effectively sat on his ass, twiddling his thumbs as weeks and weeks and weeks go by. He could just pick up the phone and call DeSantis yesterday and do a statewide lockdown. Do it a week ago. Do it 3 weeks ago. Many people wouldn't have gotten coronavirus that will now, because it took until today for DeSantis to finally do it. He couldn't have put pressure on those Republican governors. He couldn't have put some sort of directive for a national lockdown and put some kind of either economic pressure or at least media pressure on states to do that. No, he's crying completely fake tears. He's been pretending that this was a big, made-up, exaggerated plot of the media from the very beginning. He has contributed to the number of cases and the number of deaths. I'm mostly disinterested in what he thinks about this at this point. I do care about his actions, and unfortunately, those still continue to disappoint.
But, John, he really did have a somber tone in that presser, and everything else that he's done wrong should be forgotten about and wiped away, because he's such a great leader now, except he's not. I mean, it doesn't matter what his tone is. What matters is he conveying accurate information that helps keep people safe? Has he ceased using these pressers as a way to rally for his reelection? Mm-hmm. And more importantly, what are his actions? What has he actually done to help protect people in the middle of this pandemic? And not only is he refusing to open that window of time for special enrollment, Politico's also reporting that Trump also doubled down on his support of a lawsuit by Republican states that could destroy the entire Affordable Care Act. Okay, so also along with coverage for 20 million more people who are insured through the law. So right now we have 27 million uninsured Americans, even with the Affordable Care Act. If he gets his way and he repeals the Affordable Care Act, you're going to add another 20 million to that number. And I'm not even including the number of people who have been laid off recently because of the pandemic, millions and millions of people who also just lost their health insurance. So this is a catastrophic situation. And I have to say, I'm definitely happy that the ladies of The View really focused on saying terrible things about Medicare for All and Bernie Sanders, rather than focusing on stories like this, where our leader, the President of the United States, is making it incredibly difficult for people to get the health care and the coverage they need to survive the pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah, this crisis has had the potential tiny silver lining of making clear to people who didn't already know how inequitable our system was in so many different ways, how abused and ignored the needs of most in the working class, but especially in people in areas that are now seen as incredibly crucial, because people need access to products, they need access to medical care. These are the sorts of people that are ignored, when a pandemic isn't going on. Like, people are being awoken to the inequities in the system, and there are people like the hosts of The View that are doing everything they can to stay asleep.
Let's talk about prison. First off, this story is not in the rundown, but I do want to let the audience know that prisoners at Rikers Island have been offered to get paid $6 an hour in order to dig mass graves for bodies, people who have died because of COVID-19. So that's happening. We're in a great situation. Let's talk about how great Trump's tone is. But there is one other prison-related story that I wanted to talk about today. And Kelly Loeffler, an appointed senator in Georgia, is very much the center of this. So let's do it. Appointed Georgia Senator Kelly Loeffler, who is accused of insider trading following a classified Senate briefing on the severity of COVID-19 back in January, has just disclosed more information about her stocks, what she dumped, what she purchased after receiving incredibly important insider information on COVID-19. So earlier we had shared this story about how she and her husband, who is the chair of the New York Stock Exchange, dumped a bunch of stock earlier this year, immediately after she had that Senate briefing. This latest filing is a little later than that, but a lot of the stocks that she dumped were still prior to the general public knowing and really understanding the severity of COVID-19. So the Atlanta Journal-Constitution did a great story on this with more details, but let me share some of them with you. The largest transactions, they write, and the most politically problematic, involve $18.7 million in sales of Intercontinental Exchange stock in 3 separate deals dated February 26th and March 11th. Loeffler is a former executive with the Intercontinental Exchange. So you see ICE in the graphic, but it's not the ICE that we're thinking of when it comes to immigration. And her husband, Jeff Sprecher, is the CEO of the company, which owns the New York Stock Exchange, among other financial marketplaces. The couple also sold shares in retail stores, which certainly have been hit by this pandemic, such as Lululemon and TJ Maxx, and invested in a company that makes COVID-19 protective garments. Interesting. There's more, but John, I want you to jump in.
Yeah, every added detail makes it harder to believe the cover story that they have come up with. I mean, I understand she's incredibly wealthy. That's sort of the defense. We sell millions of dollars in stock all the time. I don't even know about it. That's how much money I have. Fortunes come and go every day. They tell me about it months later. I don't know. So that's what we're supposed to believe. Hey, maybe it's true, but it sure does seem coincidental that a bunch of senators engaged in what seem like incredibly strategic both buys and sells directly related to the industries that are going to be hurt and those that are going to potentially profit. Not necessarily that did profit, but those that it would be reasonable to assume would. I think for regular people, that is incredibly hard to believe. And that's why there needs to be an investigation. She's released a few financial disclosure documents. No, we need people to look into the communications between her and her husband, and whoever is actually managing these trades. If she actually communicated with them, especially in the immediate aftermath of that classified briefing, then there's probably some sort of documented trail that we can find, and that would severely undercut the story that she's trying to spin.
Absolutely. Look, as always, of course, we have a justice system, and, on Twitter and social media, I'll usually refer to stories like this and I'll say prison, right? Because based on the evidence that we have in front of us right now, she sure as hell looks guilty. But of course, we have the justice system for a reason, and she should have her day in court, along with all the other senators who have been implicated in this. So Richard Burr is part of this. There's some indication that Senator Inhofe also dumped some stocks. All of these cases are a little different from one another. Dianne Feinstein apparently dumped some stocks. We don't know if every single one of them is guilty. What we do know is that there's some suspicious behavior, suspicious activity in their trading immediately following that Senate briefing. And so I think that it makes all the sense in the world to do this investigation. And by the way, just to give you some more detail into what this couple purchased, they apparently bought $206,774 in chemical giant DuPont for transactions in late February and early March. Now, DuPont has performed poorly on Wall Street lately, but the company is a major supplier of desperately needed personal protective gear as the global pandemic strains hospitals and first responders.
Yeah. Huge coincidence.
Just a big coincidence.
It is insane. It is insane that they can own stock and they can trade in stock. I was talking about it with JR in the morning. Like, if you bring up the possibility that someone who they want you to believe they're serving their country as a senator or as a representative, the idea that they should not be able to own stock, people be like, oh my God, seriously? You expect them to sacrifice that much while they're serving our country? Even though we make massive restrictions on what people in the armed forces can do while they're serving their country, they give up all sorts of rights. But senators who are given incredible amounts of power and privilege and will definitely be rich for the rest of their lives, lobbying jobs and all that, we can't temporarily stop them from trading stocks while they're in office. We don't let athletes bet on games they play in. You know why? Because even though the stakes are really, really, really low, we know that theoretically some of them might want to influence the outcome. It is reasonable to assume that if someone can make money by influencing the outcome of something, they're going to do that. She's been in the Senate for like a couple of months. I don't extend any trust to her, okay? No, like if you can make decisions, if you can pass legislation that'll affect stock prices, that bothers me. The entire idea that Mnuchin is going to be able to hand out huge quantities of money, you don't think he's going to personally profit off of that, knowing what stocks are likely to skyrocket after the government hands them dozens of billions of dollars? And no, I don't trust her any more than him.
Yeah, 100%. And just to give you a little bit of a positive update to this story, because look, I really want people to stop having this like defeatist mentality, because I see a lot of people on social media saying, well, they're senators, they're above the law, so there's no use fighting them on this. No, we need to apply pressure. I don't think Americans understand how powerful a collectivist movement can really be. And luckily, there's been enough pushback that the FEC is looking into this to some extent. So I'm sorry, the FTC. So the investigators have actually reached out to Senator Richard Burr of North Carolina, who along with Loeffler has faced widespread criticism about stock trading. Transactions made by the U.S. Senators David Perdue of Georgia, Dianne Feinstein of California, and Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma were also criticized, but to a lesser extent. As I said earlier, each case is a little different, right? So the reason why I focus so much on Kelly Loeffler is because her actions, basically, in addition to the fact that she's married with the chair of the New York Stock Exchange, make her case particularly egregious.
Yeah. Yeah, although you know, I'm it's good of you to point out the differences between all of these. But you know what? Just to be safe, let's ban them all from owning stocks. That should cover everyone's concerns, I think. And barring that, an investigation and possibly prison.
Definitely, because it's not public servant isn't like a suggested title, right? You're called a public servant because you're meant to serve. It's a duty that you have signed up for. But that job title has become so corrupted that people just see dollar signs. And right now, we need leaders who actually want to represent us. And keep in mind, Senator Loeffler was not elected. She was appointed. And it's because she can't win based on her own merits. Anyway, we got to go. That's it. That's the show. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you guys soon. What's up, members? It's post-game showtime. How you doing, John?
You talking to them or you talking to me? Oh, I thought you were talking to the members.
To
it was so like inviting, your whole intro. I was like, how you doing, guys? Yeah, I'm okay. I'm tired. These days are still very early and we're pretty much going. It's dealing with the tech issues that crop up that make no sense whatsoever. It's a bit mentally wearing. I feel a little bit dead.
Yeah, I totally get it. It's like the usual stresses of doing the job that we do with a bunch of other stuff piling up, right? So yes, it's the tech stuff, but also just like trying to keep things together in your personal life, like making sure my parents are taken care of, like, I don't want them going to a grocery store. I don't want my mom I don't even want my mom going to the pharmacist, So it's like an added thing of being like a caretaker and then doing all this stuff at home for the show. And like right before Brett called to connect us for the show, like the entire setup was like turned around because it was just turned around in my place, but now it's okay.
Interesting.
Anyway. Yeah. No, it's
I don't even know what that's a reference to.
it's when, people think that they're helping and you appreciate it, except like leave the set. Please don't touch the setup.
We're talking about Charlie. Okay.
Yeah.
That dog barely understands videography.
So I was like in a panic. Anyway, let's get to some of the news that I think is important to discuss. Look, one of the hardest things also is doing a 2-hour show. I usually end the day feeling like we haven't done enough because there's always stories that don't make it. And I always feel like trash when we don't give you guys everything that I think you should know about. And it's particularly bad when the show is an hour instead of 2, right? So I know we're doing a lot more content, like news content in the post game. I hope our members enjoy it and appreciate it. And we do mix in our personal stories as well. But here's a story that's really been on my radar recently, and I really want to discuss it with you guys. So, all right. Sometimes there's credit given when credit is not due. And that's certainly the case, the never-ending story between mainstream media journalists and Donald Trump. Now, recently, Donald Trump gave a presser where he seemed to at least pretend to understand the severity and the devastation of COVID-19. Take a look.
I have to tell you, Anderson, I've never seen President Trump like this. I know people might say, well, I can't ever trust him. He's a phony and so on. People may say that. But, Anderson, I have to tell you, sitting in that room that close to him, I've never seen President Trump like this. And I think to some extent he is scared right now. And I have to tell you, people may not believe the president when he says any of this. And you and I have been, pretty critical of him from time to time. Yeah. This was a different Donald Trump tonight. I think he gets it, Anderson.
Oh, we'll see.
So that is Jim Acosta's take on Donald Trump sounding somber during the presser. Keep in mind that just a day earlier, he was berated by Donald Trump very publicly for simply asking Trump a question about what Trump literally said word for word. He quoted Trump in the context of his question, and Trump just totally berated him. And then a day later, Jim Acosta is like, wow, Trump, he nailed it, really serious stuff. What are you doing?
I don't know. I think that some of them are just, they're desperate for the time that they thought, the time before Trump, where they thought things worked and were rational and reasonable, and they want to go back to that. And some of them probably deep down inside know that we're not going to have that until we don't have Trump anymore, at the very least. But they want to believe that it's possible. They want to believe that he can potentially change at like 80 years old, that suddenly he's going to become a very different person. Maybe they believe that. I don't know. I would personally say, I don't care what tone he takes. What did he do after that press conference? What did he announce at that press conference that represented a radical change in the way the government is going to respond to this?
He refuses.
Is there anything?
Nothing. No. In fact, he has doubled down in attempting to repeal the Affordable Care Act. He has refused to open a special enrollment window so people who did not enroll for health insurance earlier in the year would have an opportunity to do so in the case that they contract a virus that could kill them. His actions have been disastrous both before all these quarantines and lockdowns started happening and after all these quarantines and lockdowns started happening. He has used the pressers for his own political agenda and his own attempts to rally his supporters for re-election. And instead of really, look, they need to hold his feet to the fire, and sometimes they do, and we give them credit when they do. We defended Acosta earlier this week when Trump berated him, okay? But don't then turn around and immediately give him like a cookie because he happens to change his tone and at least pretend, because I don't buy anything that Trump says, right? His actions speak louder than words, but all he needs to do is change his tone and pretend for these reporters to like give him a round of applause, and it's ridiculous. So we're not done yet. Then there was Rich Lowry, who is one of the editors over at National Review. He's a conservative, and he tweeted the following: Trump, rightfully, slamming the just the flu argument at this briefing. Except I think the person who made the just the flu argument was Trump himself. I can't remember. Maybe we should watch this video and see.
Flu in our country kills from 25,000 people to 69,000 people a year. That was shocking to me. And so far, if you look at what we have with the 15 people.
I asked that question. I said, how many people die of the flu? You know, you keep hearing about flu shot, take your flu shot. But I said, how many people die of the flu? And they said, sir, we lose between 27,000 and, you know, somewhere in the 70s.
I didn't know people died from the flu. 36,000 people died. 27,000 to 77,000, that's your flu. And again, you had a couple of years where it was over 100,000 people died from the flu. You're going to lose a number of people to the flu, but you're going to lose more people by putting a country into a massive recession. You don't have to necessarily grab every handrail unless you have to. You know, you do certain things that you do when you have the flu. I mean, view this the same as the flu.
There were 60 million cases of swine flu and a lot of deaths. And they didn't do anything about it.
Right now, I guess we're at 26 deaths. And if you look at the flu for this year, we're at 8 million, we're looking at 8,000 deaths. Or depression.
The flu, we lose, you know, thousands of people a year to the flu. But that number is very, very much under 1% in the category of the overall population in terms of this corona flu.
They are attacked, successfully attacked, to a much lesser extent by this pandemic, by this disease, this whatever they want to call it. You can call it a germ, you can call it a flu, you can call it a virus. You know, you can call it many different names. I'm not sure anybody even knows what it is.
I had not seen that last bit. What was that weird tangent he went on where he was speculating in real time about what word to apply to it and then implying that doctors don't know?
He does that kind of stuff all the time. All the time. Hey, but he's pretending to be somber about COVID-19 during one of his press conferences. So why don't we just give him all the credit in the world and pretend as though he wasn't the person downplaying COVID-19 from the beginning? By the way, Rich, real quick, I want to give a little more context, because while Rich Lowry is conservative, he is not like some Trump loyalist. He's actually been very critical of Trump in the past. So for him to give Trump credit for something that he's not actually deserving of is frustrating, because there are so few principled conservatives out there.
Yeah, it's not like there haven't been over the course of the last 3 weeks a dozen, 50 articles written. Why does Trump keep comparing this to the flu? Like, it's so out there. And so I looked for some quotes. He said at one point that this is in some ways easier than the flu, in some ways a little bit tougher. He said it's a little bit like the flu. It's a little like the regular flu that we have flu shots for, and we'll essentially have a flu shot for this in a fairly quick manner. He just likes saying the word flu. And then the best, this was from a February 26th press conference. So he just said, people are wrong to have compared this to the flu, to make even sort of vague attempts to connect this to the flu, because it's so different. And so I found this quote from February 26th press conference. This is a flu. This is like a flu. That's what he said. I don't see how you can be more direct in your comparison to the flu than saying this is a flu, this is like a flu. But Rich Lowry, give him some credit.
I just want the nightmare to end. I just want the nightmare to end. It's like every morning I wake up, I don't know when this is going to stop. I don't think it ever will. I wake up in the morning and for like maybe 10 seconds, I think like, oh, it was just one of those like lucid dreams. Like this pandemic's not real. Trump leading the country in the middle of a worldwide pandemic is not real. And then it all like hits me again. It's just like that devastating moment every morning where I realize that this is reality. This is the nightmare that we're living in. And it just gets worse, guys. It just gets worse. It gets worse. Like in
That's
2016,
the viral campaign we need.
2016, 2017, I'm like, well, it can't get any worse than this. No, wrong. It has gotten worse and it will continue to get worse. And the people who have enabled Donald Trump, including those who launder his image the second he does something that appears even a little responsible, should be held accountable for that. They're the people who are supposedly informing the public, and they're doing such a poor job of it. And I'm being very generous in the way that I'm commenting on them. Because
so serious.
There's a lot more foul language I have in my mind, but I won't use it.
Oh,
okay.
I bet.
So let's move on. Let's talk about a little international news. So Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, has been given some pretty devastating anti-democratic powers. And what we're seeing, not just in this country, but worldwide, including in the United States, is that dishonest actors are exploiting the pandemic in order to solidify their own power. And that's certainly what we're seeing with Viktor Orban. Now, according to reporting, Hungary's parliament gave Orban the right to rule by decree until his government decides. The coronavirus crisis has ended, defying criticism from European Union leaders. So they voted on this bill that essentially gives him unlimited power. Okay, the bill passed on almost entirely by votes from the Prime Minister's Nationalist Party, contained two important provisions. If Parliament is unable to meet, which its leaders have already said would be difficult, Orban could continue to govern under a state of emergency, creating and suspending laws by decree. Only Orban's government, or 2/3 majority in parliament, could decide when this period would come to an end. Now, is this a fair system? Because it seems like there's checks and balances at play, right? Parliament can decide, all right, he doesn't need to have all this unilateral power anymore. Except here's the problem. You need 2/3 of parliament to agree on that, and Orban's party controls 2/3 of parliament. Democracy is over in Hungary. Like, let's just call it what it is. This pandemic, as devastating as it is when it comes to people's personal lives, one day when hopefully we get past it, understand that the devastation will continue if we allow politicians to get away with these types of things in the periphery while we're focused on surviving. I mean, we're seeing this in the United States as well. The Department of Justice, we talked about this story recently, has asked federal judges to detain suspects or people indefinitely. Anyone that the DOJ wants to hold indefinitely in the middle of this virus, they're trying to do it. They're attempting to do it, right? So basically do away with our protections when it comes to the justice system. These are things we need to pay close attention to, right? So jump in, John. I want to give you a few more details after I hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it seems like a terrible idea for anyone who's not a part of his ruling majority. Why would you need a let's say this is an emergency situation where we just can't meet, so we need him to rule. Why would you need to end it with anything more than a simple majority? I would say, why not just have 10% say that it doesn't need to exist anymore? That should be enough to cancel it. Why would it be a higher standard than passing legislation in the first place? But as you've alluded to, this isn't like some new turn from either the party or the individual. This is where they were going. So just briefly, so I looked up, this is from May 13th, 2019, article in The Guardian. Donald Trump showered praise on Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban for a tremendous job and shrugged off complaints that his White House visit represents a reward for the erosion of democracy in Hungary and Orban's close ties to the Kremlin. Sitting alongside Orban in the Oval Office, Trump declared it a great honor to host Orban, who he claimed was highly respected all over Europe, particularly for his anti-immigration policies. He does say, he's a little bit controversial, but that's okay. You've done a good job and you've kept your country safe. I mean, people knew that this was the direction.
Yeah, and Donald Trump has quite a bit of admiration for fascists around the world. We know that he has a good relationship with Bolsonaro in Brazil. He has a good relationship with Orban. When he went to North Korea and noticed the treatment of North Korea citizens by this dictatorial regime, he talked to the American press and essentially said, like, I wish I had that. Everyone stands up when he walks in the room. I wish I had that. I mean, it's just, it's terrifying that those are the types of people that he has admiration for. And the reason why I bring up this story is because, first of all, we should care about what happens internationally. We should learn from other countries, both from their mistakes and from what they're doing right. But it should also make us hyper aware of what our own government is doing in a moment of crisis, because the ramifications of what happened in the aftermath of 9/11 legislatively, what the executive branch was able to do when it came to expanding mass surveillance on American people, we're suffering the consequences of that right now. And I don't want us to further devolve as a country because of the crisis we're experiencing today. And one other thing I wanted to note about what's happening in Hungary is that the law that they passed imposes a maximum of 5 years prison time against those who intentionally spread false news or distorted truth that is seen to be detrimental to the government's efforts to fight the virus and address its economic toll. We all know what that means. When you have a power-hungry person like Orban who has done away with democracy in that country, he wants to have in his mind, legal path to retaliate and imprison his opponents. There's no democracy left in that country, and it's devastating.
Yeah, it's sad to watch it. And you pointed out, that we have to be on guard as well. Like there are people saying, obviously we need to be adapting to this by setting up, automatic registration and mail voting and stuff like that. For our election. And Trump was just saying a couple days ago that, like, no, they want to go, the Democrats want to go crazy with the voting. They want everyone to vote. And so they're going to be blocking those efforts. And so God only knows if an election will happen. And if it does, what the conditions, what the risks you will have to take to be able to vote will be. And that's on top of all of the constant suppression efforts, at the federal and at the state level that we were already fighting against before this epidemic.
All right. There's one other story that I wanted to share with you, especially when it comes to Trump and all of the admiration he's seeing from journalists today, which is mind-blowing to me. So a talking point that you will probably hear from members of Trump's administration is that no one could have predicted a pandemic like this. So there was no way the administration could have really prepared the country for something like COVID-19, except new reporting indicates that economists in Trump's own administration had warned Trump about what would happen to the country if a pandemic had occurred. This was done in September of last year, and the White House decided to ignore its findings. Let me give you the details of what they found. And this was reported by the New York Times. This is an example of excellent reporting, in my opinion. So in late February and early March, as the corona pandemic began to spread from China to the rest of the world, President Trump, his top economic advisors played down the threat the virus posed to the U.S. economy and public health. But the 2019 study warned Americans not to conflate the risks of hold on, I think I have the wrong graphics. Okay, so basically, the 2019 study warned Americans, not to conflate the risks of a typical flu with the pandemic, right? So the existence of that warning undermines administration's officials' contentions in recent weeks that no one could have seen the virus damaging the economy as it has. So On February 18th, Thomas Phillipson, he is the person who chairs the Council of Economic Advisors. He told reporters the following, okay? I don't think Corona is as big a threat as people make it out to be. That's what he told reporters. But again, he is well aware, based on that study that was done last September, that they totally could have predicted the economic toll the economic toll caused by a massive pandemic. So, and now the situation's dire. So the government officials estimated Tuesday that the deadly pathogen could kill between 100,000 and 240,000 Americans. In fact, in a best case scenario, one economist concludes that a national suppression of economic activity to flatten the infection curve must last at least 7 weeks. In a worst case, where the shutdown proves less effective at slowing the rate of new infections, it would be economically optimal to keep the economy shuttered for nearly 8 months. So I give you her analysis on this because had the White House begun preparing as soon as they received that September 2019 study done by their own economists, we would be in a much better position to keep people safe, to ensure that the economy is at least prepared for what's going to happen, to decrease the number of people who would die as a result of a pandemic. And I want to be clear, in September of last year, they didn't do this study and find that coronavirus is going to be a big threat. But what they did realize is if we have a pandemic, we are in bad shape to deal with it, right? Mm-hmm. And the White House is like, we're not worried about pandemics. We got this. And we got hit by a pandemic. It's crazy.
Yeah, they had every warning. Like, honestly, they had not only hypothetical warnings last year and the war games that were done in the first year of the Trump administration. We also had how many weeks of watching it, watching China deal with it and then watching other countries as it started to spread in the region. We had warning after warning after warning after warning. And Trump took a different tone today. And it doesn't even mean anything. It's not going to represent anything tomorrow. But we want to believe that because our country is so powerful and so rich, I mean, we're not going to be blindsided by any sort of emergency. We want to believe that people have contingency plans for these sorts of things. But we should have been more specific when we hoped that. There are experts that are doing those sorts of analyses and putting together reports and all that. But we also need a leader who cares about any of that and will actually follow the advice of experts. And we don't have that. Trump could have been prepping for this for literally years if he wanted to. Instead, he spent the last couple of weeks talking about how he inherited a broken testing system, as if he hasn't been present for nearly a full term already.
It's a nightmare. It's such a nightmare. And, we as Americans are told over and over again that, like, when it comes to our personal finances, for instance, like, this is the reason why they're means testing us. Oh, if you earned a certain amount of money, even if you lost your job in the middle of this pandemic, you should have saved. You should have prepared for a rainy day. You should have an emergency account, right? So we're expected, by the way, in a situation where wages have been stagnant in America, to just save, to scrape by and save as much as we can in like a rainy day fund. But we can't expect the same of our own federal government when it comes to something as serious as a pandemic. So while that study from last September did not think that coronavirus was going to happen, it was still important in urging the White House to get prepared should a pandemic hit us. So we know that, like, hey, we have like a system in place. We're ready. We're prepared. We're going to decrease the number of lives that'll be lost as a result of our preparedness. Like, the fact that the federal government isn't held to that standard blows my mind. And that's the kind of stuff that we should see all of these broadcast reporters talking about. I don't care about Trump's tone. I don't care about Trump's tone. I care about his actions and I care about his competence. And he's lacking in both. Yeah. Anyway, John, you are such a rock star. You've been working all day. Thank you for doing the show with me.
Anytime.
And thank you to the audience for watching. And by the way, I got a few comments about Cenk. Cenk's totally fine. He has CEO stuff to do on Wednesdays. So he is unlikely to be on the shows on Wednesdays with us. He's got to take care of business related matters, but that's okay. He's totally fine. He's healthy. He'll be back tomorrow. All right. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Thank you, John. We'll see you tomorrow.
See you later.